We're in 2 Kings chapter 9, if you would turn there, if you would. We didn't get done with everything last week, and we're going to finish up. I have really enjoyed it. A couple years ago, I decided to journal the scriptures. For years and years, we've read different Bible reading schedules. Sometimes most often I'll just read the Bible through in the course of the year, but sometimes I'll just stay on a particular book or just maybe take the New Testament and go more slowly. And actually it was Luke and Pastor Rocky who introduced some new, fresh ideas in how to keep our devotions meaningful and impactful. And one of them was to journal what we're reading. So I thought I'd try to do that. Now, my handwriting is atrocious, so I'm writing all of this stuff down. Not only will other people probably not be able to read it because of my handwriting, I don't think I can read my own handwriting sometimes, but it has caused me to think more deliberately about what I'm reading and to try to come up with insights and ideas from the passages. And it just so happens that my journaling, and I've started in Genesis chapter 1, and here we are a year and a half later, I'm only in 2 Kings. That shows you how that's been going for me, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. But in the course of this Sunday school series, I've caught up with my journaling chapters. So the chapters that I'm reading for my daily Bible reading coincide with this Sunday school lesson. And as I was reading 2 Kings, we were discussing a series on the life and times of Elisha. Well, Elisha's fading from the biblical narrative. He dies in chapter 13, and we're not quite there. But then I'm going to continue on for a few more weeks into the summer and just pull out isolated stories from the book of 2 Kings. My idea was to take a chapter a day, but sometimes I'll skip over certain passages, but I've found some of these stories really, really interesting. And we found out from last week's lesson, and I had an outline here somewhere. It's probably in my notes here, that we were discussing chapter 8, and we looked at that incident with Hazael. Hazael was a servant to his king, King Ben-Hadad from Syria, and he basically was sent on an errand by his king to find out whether he would recover from illness. Elisha said, well, yeah, he can, but he's not going to. And Hazael understood that he was going to die, and he was anxious to assume the throne himself. He'd been told years earlier, way back in Elijah's day, that he would be the next king of Syria. And so he was biding his time, and apparently he got tired of waiting. He took matters in his own hand, and he assassinated his king. He was supposed to be the king's confidant, right-hand man. He assassinated him, and he took control. And that's kind of what we looked at from chapter 8. And we then come to a quick succession of various kings. Now, I passed one of these out last week to everybody. Maybe if Ezra or Samuel, one of you guys could help me. I'm sure somebody is going to be here this morning and does not have a copy of this, and you will really need one of these. So if you were not here last week or didn't bring yours, could you raise your hand? I want to get one of those charts. For those of you that have it, you can pull it out, and we will be referencing it not only today but other times as well. This chart is extremely helpful in many ways, and it will help us to follow along in the narrative as we quickly go through these latter chapters of 2 Kings and finish up on this book. I mentioned last week that there's some confusion about some of the kings because their names are used interchangeably. They give them different renditions of their name. Also, and at least one exception here, that one of the kings is actually a queen. But her name is not necessarily a feminine name, so you might not know that. And then some of the kings in the northern and southern kingdoms share the same name, at least in one instance, and that might cause some confusion. So back on your chart, the top of it says the kings of Israel, and it says to the right in smaller print, the northern area had 10 tribes. Of the 12 tribes, 10 were in the north, and the kings of Judah, which is the southern kingdom, has 2 tribes. And we're going to come at this point in our narrative on some of the confusion that exists between some of the kings, particularly the 2 kings that have the same name. If you notice on this chart, there's a gap here. And if you look at the scripture reference, it says 1 Kings, 1 Kings, 1 Kings, and then it jumps to 2 Kings, which is the book that we're in. And the first king referenced in the northern kingdom from the book of 2 Kings is a man by the name of Jehoram. And there's an asterisk, that's a mouthful, an asterisk by his name. And that's because the writer of the biblical account wanted to avoid confusion between these two kings. And that Jehoram from the northern tribes is also referenced as Joram. His name is shortened, Joram. At the very bottom of your chart, you see that asterisk down there. It says he's also called Joram. Now, if you look at the southern kings and you follow down, when the book of 2 Kings comes, the first king mentioned thereabouts on the southern king, his name is also Jehoram. You know, it's funny how there's these people that study the Bible. They're otherwise learned men, intelligent men, logical thinking men, but they're skeptics. They undermine the truth of God's word and the inspiration of the Bible, and they sought to portray each of these men as one and the same individual, and for some reason they just list them differently. But if you look at some of the details and you follow the lineage and genealogy of these men, it would be obvious to a first grader that these are not the same men. The one at the top in the northern tribe, he came to reign when he replaced his brother Ahaziah. And the one in the southern kingdom, when he came to reign, he was the son of Jehoshaphat. So that alone, but it's very interesting when you look at the years that they reigned. If I did my math correctly, all of these years adding up, one of them only had 7 days. We're not even going to give them a portion of the year. If you add all those numbers together, if you're quick in math, 22 plus 2 is 24. 24 plus 24, 20 is 48. The 2 years from Elah is 50. And then you skip down the 7 days. We're not going to give him any credit there. That's 62 with Omri. And then 64, 84, 80. I think that if I did that right, it's 20, 40, 60, 76, 82, 86 years, right? Is that my math is correct? Liam, you're shaking your head. You're the whiz. You're the math whiz. I think that's 86 years. And if you look at the southern kings, you add those years up, it's 66, 76, 86. Well, you know why that? What a coincidence. No, because the nation divided under Solomon at the same time. So the reigns of the kings following that divided kingdom should add up. And it's interesting that Jehoram from the southern kingdom reigned from 853. He began in 841. Look at Jehoram in the northern kingdom. His reign began at, again, 841. So you understand the confusion on the part of some people, why they made that person one and the same. They came to reign at different regions within the nation in the exact same year, causing some people to be confused. They must be the same person because they came to reign in the same year, but they are not. In fact, the gentleman, the king that reigned in the northern kingdom, if you look at Jehoram there, he was succeeded by his brother Ahaziah, and Ahaziah was the son of who? The notorious King Ahab. So if Ahaziah was the son of Ahab, and Jehoram from the north was the brother of Ahaziah, that would make that Jehoram also a son of Ahab, making him the son of what woman? Jezebel. So when it says that they were bad, you know, they're bad. They're bad guys. They might have had a special category. They separated all these kings into generally good or generally bad. But they should have had a special category for Ahab and his sons. They should have been very bad or bad eggs. They were really bad guys. But Joram to the south is also listed as a bad king, and God was going to deal with him in this chapter. I just want to give you a background. He was going to raise up a person to clean house, basically, in the nation. And something that was prophesied way back in the days of Elijah, namely that Ahab and Jezebel would pay for their sins and their family members would be wiped off the earth, would take place under the leadership of a fascinating Old Testament character by the name of Jehu. Now, before we looked at any of this study, I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that if I said to you, what does anybody remember about Jehu The one thing that sticks out in my mind that would probably stick out in some of your minds is that he drove his what do you call him when a chariot? He drove his chariot furiously. He was like Brother Ernie in his driving patterns. You know, he tends to be a little bit lead-footed, so to speak. He drove that chariot furiously. That's all we were. But he's a fascinating guy, and we're going to look how God will bring judgment upon the entire nation because of what happened years ago. It must also be remembered that the Jehoram of the southern kingdom had another connection, ironic connection, with Ahab and Jezebel. The Jehoram of the northern kingdom was the son of Jezebel and Ahab. But the Jehoram of the southern kingdom had a curious connection with them. Does anybody remember what it was? He married their daughter. So it shows a little bit of something about the nation of Israel as a whole at that time. Although there was a division in power, and each of them were writing their own histories, and each of them would meet different fates as a kingdom, there were times when battles were being fought, when the nation was divided, where the foe was formidable, and where either the northern or southern kingdom were desperate enough to say, hey, we'll pay you if we'll hire mercenaries, if you send your army to come down and fight with us. We otherwise despise each other. We have different capitals, different kings, different ways of doing things, but we'll hire your army to come down and help us fight the Assyrians or the Egyptians or the Babylonians, whatever the case might be. They hired their armies and developed alliances at various times, and we'll see some of those as we go through this study, but generally they kept separate, except for this very unusual twist. The Jehoram to the south, who had a brother-in-law named Jehoram, married his sister. You find that in chapter 8, verse number 18. I think it's verse number 18. Yes. And let's go back to verse 16. In the 5th year of Joram, who is Jehoram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, Jehoshaphat being then king in Judah, Jehoram, the son of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, began to reign. 32 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 8 years in Jerusalem. All of these details about where they reigned, how long they reigned, makes it very clear to the most common sense of people that these two Jehorams are not the same people. It says, verse 18, and he walked in the way of the kings of Israel, which generally is bad, evil, idolatry, as did the house of Ahab. For the daughter of Ahab was his wife, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we're going to pick up that Jehoram a little bit later on. We want to focus now on events. We've left Syria with Hazael killing his king Ben-Hadad, assuming the throne. Elisha approaching him and saying, you're going to do a lot of bad things to my people. So much so that he wept when God revealed that to him. Now we're going to go back to this northern kingdom and look at some of the things that were happening. So we're going to pick it up in chapter number 9. Elisha instructed one of the men, unnamed men in his school of the prophets, to go and approach Jehu about a specific role that God had for his life. Not only what he would do, but who he would do it to and why he would do it. So let's pick it up in chapter 9. Elisha the prophet called one of the children of the prophets and said unto him, gird up thy loins and take this box of oil in thine hand and go to Ramoth Gilead. Why do you think people would carry a box of oil around? What did they use oil for in those days? Anointing. Sometimes for healing, sometimes for position of leadership. God directed leadership. We'll find out before this chapter is over that Jehu was not a good man, but God was going to use Jehu to pronounce judgment upon Ahab's house. By the way, Ahab had died, to put in perspective in case we're throwing all these names out, Ahab had died 12 years earlier, wounded in battle, and he was gone. But guess who was still around? Jezebel was still around. And Ahab's sons each took a shot at being king of the nation. One of them was rather short-lived, but he had two sons that took positions as king. But Jezebel was still around, and his sons were still alive. And that's not what Elijah said would happen years earlier. Elijah said that God was going to wipe out the memory of his family because of his sins. It says in verse 2, and when thou comest, Jehu, when thou comest thither, look out there Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, and go in and make him arise up from among his brethren and carry him to an inner chamber. In other words, separate him from the rest of his people. He was apparently a captain in Jehoram's army. He was a military man. He was a fighting man. And go to that house where he is and get him away privately. Then take the box of oil and pour it on his head and say, thus saith the Lord, I have anointed thee king over Israel. Then open the door and flee and tarry not. So the young man, even the young man, the prophet, went to Ramoth Gilead. When he came, and behold, the captains of the host were sitting, and he said, I have an errand to run, O captain. And Jehu said, unto which of us? In other words, he thought he had instructions from the king. Who do you need to give these instructions to? What are the special orders? Who do you want to talk to? And he, the prophet, said, to thee, O captain. And he arose and went into the house, and he poured the oil on his head, and said unto him, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I have anointed thee king over the people of the Lord, even over Israel. And thou shalt smite the house of Ahab thy master, that I may avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the servants of the Lord at the hand of Jezebel, who was still alive. For the whole house of Ahab shall perish, and I will cut off Ahab from him that pisseth against the wall, and him that is shut up and left in Israel. And I will make the house of Ahab like the house of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and like the house of Baasha, the son of Ahijah. And the dogs shall eat Jezebel in the portion of Jezreel, and there shall be none to bury her. And he opened the door and fled. So there's a lot going on here. So Elisha calls this prophet, says, go anoint Jehu to be the next king. He was a captain in the army. And he says, finally, after years of going by, Ahab is now dead. We're going to finally remove the name of Ahab from off the earth. We're going to take care of Jezebel, and we're going to take care of her son, who was the reigning king. It was a very unpopular thing for the prophet, the man of God, not to mention Jehu, for them to come to him and say, we're going to anoint you to be the next king over Israel. The reason Elisha instructed this prophet to take him in an inner chamber, in a special room to do this, was if it was done openly, there would be a lot of havoc and problems for Jehu. I think it could be argued that his own men would say, hey, we want nothing to do with this. We know Jezebel, and we know her son, Jehoram. This is not a good thing. So to anoint somebody to be a successor while the other king is still alive is not a popular thing to do. It is no wonder that Elisha told the man of God, this prophet, after you've done this, anointed him with oil, told him he's going to be the next king, book it out of there. He ran out the back door, and he's probably still running today. Well, he probably wouldn't have lived this long, but if he was, he'd still run. I mean, this guy was running for his life after doing this. And Jehu came upon this position of leadership rather unusually. He was not the son of a king. He was not a political advisor. He was not a confidant like Hazael. He was just a captain. He was just a guy serving in the army. But God would use him to create a change in leadership, mostly because of their wicked behavior going way back to the days of Elijah. Now, I'm going to stop at this point, and I want you to think about something. I want you to think about people you've known through history, dictators, demonically inspired men who have brought tremendous havoc upon their people and upon others. And I'm sure if you're like me, we've sometimes paused and said, why did God allow that person to do such damage to the world? World leaders. I'm talking about world leaders in our lifetimes. Well, maybe not some of the younger people, but some of the adults here. We've known of world leaders that were wicked men, heinous men, murderous men, treacherous men, and they not only did they thrive in their respective areas of the world, but they seemed to live a life of luxury. And we sometimes think, I don't know, I play these mind games, to myself, and once I thought to myself, more than once I thought to myself, if given the opportunity as a child of God, if I could be given the choice to put a dictator like that out of commission, if I were in a position to shoot a villainous leader, would I do it? Maybe you don't raise your hand if you thought those wicked thoughts as well. But it's kind of funny. Like in war, you go out in war and you see people, and you wonder if I had a chance to take them out in the context of a war setting, you'd be completely justified in doing so. But what if you just came upon a person? I remember I'm sort of a World War II buff. I remember a setting where Hitler was meeting with a group of his advisors, and of all things, a train car. Anybody remember that story? And there was one of his men who was courageous enough, and I think he had some type of explosive device, if I'm not mistaken, and through quite miraculous means, Hitler escaped assassination from that setting. And I thought, I have to admit, in my heart, I was like, they almost got him, they almost got him. They came that close to getting him, and I thought, here I am thinking these terrible thoughts about people, but I do so because in the huge context, Hitler was responsible for killing tens of thousands of people. And other world dictators and leaders, the harm that they did to themselves and to their own people. Saddam Hussein, just the things that happened in some of these civil wars, and they're still taking place around the world, some of these dictators. I sometimes say to myself, why does God let these knuckleheads stay in a position of power? I struggle with that. Why does God let the worst of the worst, these murderous people, continue to kill innocent people, and their own people, their own family members? There are people who felt threatened by their own family members and put their own family members to death. In fact, the Herods in the New Testament are a good example of this. If you go trace the history of the Herods, they quite regularly killed their own family members because they felt that they were a risk to their throne. These insecure, wicked people giving power, and I believe inspired by demons or Satan himself, would be better off for the world just to have them off the scene. Why would God allow these people to stay in positions of leadership? And if you study these chapters and the way that the events are playing out in 2 Kings, it provides us a glimpse into the mind of God. God never forgets about these things. God never forgets what these people have done. And God is going to deal with them in his own way. Given the choice to go back in history and putting a rifle or pistol in my hand and seeing Hitler in a moment of isolation where I could have got away, I don't think I would have the courage or character to shoot a man like that. Even though my nation's army were dying by the thousands trying to accomplish the same thing, I don't think I'd have the courage to do that. But I wonder sometimes what God is thinking about leaving people like that in power. Well, in some respects, we don't always see the mind of God in everything, but we get a glimpse into the fact that God was always in control of this situation. He knew what he was going to do, and he knew, more importantly, when he was going to do that. And God always has a timing for everything. Much of the disaster and the problems that God's people faced in these chapters in 2 Kings are a direct result of their own sin and disobedience to God. He was judging his own people. And he was using wicked men in a position of leadership to accomplish that task. And so he brings Jehu to the scene. And we are going to finally going to deal with the matter of Jezebel. So he took that position of leadership. Look at verse 14 of chapter number 9. So Jehu, the son of Jehoshaphat, the son of Nimshi, conspired against Jehoram, who was the son of Ahab. But King Joram was returned to be healed in Jezreel of his wounds which the Syrians had given him when he fought with Hazael, king of Syria. And Jehu said, if it be your minds, let none go forth nor escape out of the city to go to tell it to Jezreel. Well, who lived in Jezreel? Jezebel lived in Jezreel. And Jehu rode in his chariot and went to Jezreel, for Joram lay there. And Ahaziah, king of Judah, was come down to see Joram. That's the southern king. And there stood a watchman on the tower of Jezreel, and he spied the company of Jehu as he came, and said, I see a company. And Joram said, take a horseman and send to meet them, and let him say, is it peace? And so they went one on horseback to meet him. And basically, not once but twice, Jehu says, what are you involved in this? It's none of your business. Get behind me. And they kept sending these servants out and looking from a distance and said, these servants aren't returning. They're making everybody a little bit uneasy. And it says, there's that famous verse in verse 20, the watchman told, saying, he came even unto them and cometh not again, and the driving is like the driving of Ernie-Kua. I'm Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he driveth furiously. Are you a fast driver, Brother Ernie? No, he's been in like 6 car wrecks in the last 5 years, but they're all running into him. So I tease him about his driving, but they're all running into him. I think he should get a bike, quite frankly, and get on a bike at this point. He's a dangerous man behind the wheel. You got to watch out for Brother Ernie. They keep running into him. Joram said, make ready, and his chariot was made ready, and Joram king of Israel and Ahaziah king of Judah went out, each in his chariot, and they went out against Jehu and met him in the portion of Naboth the Jezreelite. No, that's interesting. Where did they meet? In the same vineyard that years earlier Elijah had approached Ahab and Jezebel and said, just as you've killed this man Naboth and you've taken his property, God is going to judge you for that. Came to pass when Joram saw Jehu, he says, is it peace, Jehu? And he answered, what peace? So long as the whoredoms of thy mother Jezebel and her witchcrafts are so many. Wow. That's calling it like it is. Joram turned his hands and fled and said to Ahaziah, this is treachery. In other words, I am out of here. This is not my fight. This is not my battle. I'm just going to check on you, how you're doing from your wounds in battle. And now you got this crazed man coming, driving his chariot. And if there's treachery here, there's going to be killing and murder. I'm having none of it. And he wanted just to get away from there. And Jehu, look at this, drew a bow with his full strength and smote Jehoram between his arms. And the arrow went out at his heart, and he sunk down in his chariot. Bam. It's already started. The battle has started. In one moment, Jehu kills the son of Jezebel, the son of Ahab. Then sent Joab to Bidkar, his captain, take up and cast him in the portion of the field of Naboth the Jezreelite, burying him in the exact same place where Naboth was buried when his land was taken treacherously by his parents. And he says, for remember how that when thou rode together with Ahab his father, the Lord laid this burden upon him. Surely I have seen yesterday the blood of Naboth and the blood of his sons, saith the Lord, and I will requite thee in this plot, saith the Lord. Now therefore take and cast him into the plot of ground according to the word of the Lord. But when Ahaziah, the king of Judah, saw this, he fled by the way of the garden house. And Jehu followed after him and said, smite him also in the chariot. And they did so at the going in of Gur, which is by Ibleam. And he fled to Megiddo and died there. So Jehu killed both the reigning kings of the northern and southern tribes, and he wasn't done. It's easy to see why God appointed a military captain to take care of this. And his servants carried him in a chariot to Jerusalem, and he buried him in a sepulchre with his fathers in the city of David. In the 11th year of Joram, the son of Ahab, began Ahaziah to reign over Judah. Okay, if you look at your chart, you'll see that on the northern side, Ahaziah is the other son. There's Jehoram and the other son there. And Ahaziah, he reigned over Judah. This is Ahaziah to reign over Judah. So this would be in 841. Look how many years of his reign lasted. 1 year. How did he meet his demise? Jehu. Jehu was cleaning house. Jehu was purifying the nation here. And when Jehu was come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she painted her face and tired her head and looked out at a window. So he takes out her son, takes out the king of the southern kingdom who was conspiring with the northern kingdom, and he was removed. And then Jehu continues on to Jezreel, where Jezebel is, and I'm going to paraphrase this section because we're out of time, but he sees her at the top of a palace, and she's looking out a window, and when she heard that Jehu was coming, it's very curious that she dolled herself up. Now, maybe only you ladies could offer some insights about that. If I was a woman and knew that this crazed man was coming to end my life, I might have hidden. I might have I don't know where I would have hidden. I would have hidden in a well. I would have taken out. I would have done whatever I could to get away. She dolls herself up. In fact, when Jehu comes and says, I'm here to deal with this problem, she seems to try to intimidate him. And she references two other kings, one from the north and one from the south, who faced terrible fates when their lives ended early. You see there in verse number 31, had Zimri peace, who slew his master? Well, if you look in your chart, if you look at Zimri, he is the fifth king of the northern kingdom. And if you look at Zimri, he was a captain of the chariots. His life only lasted 7 days, and after being wounded, he committed suicide. She's saying to him, you're just like him. You're a captain of the army. And you killed your predecessor. He's killed his predecessor, and look what happened to him. And then she gave another example, again, of someone trying to intimidate him to think, if you follow through this, you're going to die. And she's all dolled up, she's looking the part. Well, he said, is anybody up there with her on our side? And that's an interesting question. It shows that she was not a beloved queen. Because out of fear alone, and a respect to her position, they should have said, no, nobody's on your side. We're on her side. This is our queen. But there were some eunuchs up there who had served her for who knows how long. And they were apparently fed up with her. And they said, well, we're on your side. He says, then throw her down. Throw her down from the top floor of that. I see those young men in the back smiling when I said that. One of the young people gave a speech. Was that yours? I could not find that speech. After much effort, I came across at least a rendition of a speech, and I'm ashamed to say this. Every time I read this terrible passage of this woman losing her life in a horrendous way, this humorous speech keeps coming back to my mind, and I found a copy of it. I'm going to leave this lighthearted thought with you before we pick up the story next week, okay? I don't know if this is Alan memorized a portion of something like this, but this humorous speech kind of goes like this. A candidate for church membership was asked, what part of the Bible do you like best? He said, I like the New Testament best. Then he was asked, what book in the New Testament is your favorite? He answered, the book of the parables, sir. Then they asked him to relate one of the parables to the membership committee. And a bit uncertain, he began. So he's trying to, on the fly, make up this parable that he remembers somewhere in the Bible. And here's his rendition of this parable. Once upon a time, a man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. And the thorns grew up and choked the man. And he went on and met the queen of Sheba. And she gave that man, sir, 1,000 talents of silver and 100 changes of garment. And he got in his chariot and drove furiously. And as he was driving along under the big tree, his hair got caught up in a limb and left him hanging there. And he hung there many days and many nights. The ravens brought him food to eat and to drink, water to drink. One night when he was hanging there asleep, his wife Delilah came along and cut off his hair. And he fell on stony ground. And as that began to rain, and it rained 40 days and 40 nights. And he hid himself in a cave. Later he went on and met a man who said, come in and take supper with me. But he said, I can't come, for I have married a wife. And the man went out into the highways and hedges and compelled him to come in. He then came to Jerusalem and saw Queen Jezebel. Here's the part that I couldn't get out of my mind. He saw Queen Jezebel sitting high and lifted up in a window of the wall. When she saw him, she laughed, and he said, throw her down out of there. And they threw her down. And he said, throw her down again. And they threw her down 70 times 7. And the fragments which they picked up filled 12 baskets full. Now, whose wife will she be in the day of the judgment? And then the speech concludes with, the membership committee agreed that he was indeed a knowledgeable candidate for membership in the church. So now I've ruined all of your minds. Whenever you read the story in 2 Kings about Jezebel being thrown down, you're going to think about her being thrown down 70 times 7. I can tell you with the authority of the Bible, she was only thrown down once. That's all it took to do the job. But we'll see what happens to her after she was thrown down next week. Father,